She stood alone beside her mother's coffin. The church was silent. Not a single person from her husband's family came, not even him. She wiped her tears and opened her phone to check if maybe someone had sent a condolence message. Instead, in the family group chat, her billionaire husband had just shared a video, laughing, drinking, dancing with his family at their Christmas party. His sister commented, "Best night ever." His mother added laughing emojis. Her hands trembled. She stared at the screen, heart cracking, and then she typed one message, just one sentence. And that message shattered their entire world. "Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty raise every woman with a dignity that no hardship can break, and a peace so deep it calms every storm around her. May her voice be heard, her worth be honored, and her heart be held with tenderness and care. May she walk with confidence, loved by her family, respected by her world, and protected in every step she takes. She is not just part of the home, she is the home, the warmth, the guidance, the quiet strength that keeps love alive. And may every house listening to this be blessed with harmony. May kindness replace anger, patience replace frustration, and understanding replace silence. May your health stay strong, your days stay gentle, and your nights rest in safety and calm. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, write, 'I am with Mr. Peter.'" The cathedral swallowed her whole, its vaulted ceiling stretching into shadows that seemed to mirror the emptiness inside her chest. Gayse Green stood beside the mahogany coffin, her hand resting on wood so polished she could see her reflection. Hollow eyes, lips pressed together to keep from screaming, skin that looked grey under the flickering candlelight. Her mother lay inside, dressed in the blue Sunday dress she'd worn to Guy's wedding, the dress she'd saved for months to buy because she wanted to look dignified when her daughter married into the Harrington family. The irony of that dress burned like acid in Guy's throat. December wind rattled the stained glass windows, making the saints and angels seem to tremble in their eternal poses of mercy and judgment. The church was built to hold hundreds, designed for grand ceremonies where important people gathered to mark life's significant passages. Today it held exactly two, Guy's and Father Michael, who kept glancing at his watch as though hoping someone, anyone, might still arrive to justify his presence. The pews stretched behind her like accusatory witnesses, their emptiness more condemning than any crowd. She'd sent the messages herself, personally texted every member of the Harrington family. Her mother-in-law, Constance, had responded with a single word, "Noted." Ben's sister, Joanna, sent back a sad face emoji, nothing more. His brother, Trevor, hadn't bothered to respond at all. Her husband had read the message and left her unseen, those two blue check marks stabbing her heart with their silent dismissal. She told herself they were busy, that the holiday season complicated schedules, that surely Ben would find a way to slip away from whatever commitments held him. She told herself lies, because the truth was too devastating to face in those first raw hours after her mother stopped breathing. The smell of lilies was overwhelming. Funeral flowers that arrived this morning from a generic service. Not personally chosen, not lovingly arranged. Guise had paid for them herself, just like she'd paid for the coffin, the burial plot, the service, the modest reception she'd planned that no one would attend. Her mother had died in a hospice room, Guise holding her hand through the final hours, whispering promises about heaven and peace, while her heart shattered into pieces she wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. In those last moments, her mother had squeezed her hand and said, "You deserve so much more than what you've accepted, baby girl. Promise me you'll remember your worth," Guise had promised, not understanding then what prophecy those words contained. Father Michael cleared his throat gently, his weathered face creased with sympathy that felt like pity. "Mrs. Harrington, we can postpone if you'd like. Perhaps later this week, when more people can attend." "No," her voice came out stronger than she felt. "My mother deserves to be laid to rest with dignity, whether an audience shows up to witness it or not." He nodded. understanding something in her tone that went deeper than logistics and scheduling. "Shall we begin then?" Before she could answer, her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Hope flared stupidly in her chest. Maybe Ben, maybe an explanation, maybe proof that she wasn't as alone as these empty pews suggested. She pulled out the phone, unlocked the screen, and opened the family group chat, the one where Ben's mother shared recipes and vacation photos, where his siblings posted accomplishments and celebration announcements, where guys existed mostly as a silent observer of their perfect lives. The newest message was a video from Ben, posted minutes ago. Her finger hovered over the play button, some instinct warning her that what she was about to see would change everything, that certain knowledge couldn't be unknown once witnessed. She pressed play anyway, because hope dies hard and love dies harder. The video opened on crystal chandeliers and champagne towers, on the Harrington family's annual Christmas gala in full spectacular glory. The camera panned across the ballroom of Constance's mansion, the mansion guys had secretly saved from foreclosure, though none of them knew that detail. Women in designer gowns laughed behind perfectly manicured hands. Men in tuxedos toasted with glasses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The decorations were magazine-worthy, gold and silver and white, creating a winter wonderland that probably required a team of professionals to install. Then Ben appeared on screen, his arms slung around Joanna's shoulders, both of them flushed with champagne and Christmas cheer. He raised his glass toward the camera, his smile wide and genuine in a way he hadn't smiled at guys in months. "To family!" His voice rang out clear and joyful. "The only thing that matters, today and always." The camera shifted, catching Constance in her element, holding court among her society friends, resplendent in diamonds that caught the light like tiny suns. She blew a kiss toward the screen, and someone off camera yelled, "Best party of the season!" Trevor appeared next, dancing badly but enthusiastically, his wife laughing at his moves. The whole family was there, every single one of them, celebrating together, while guys stood alone beside her mother's coffin in an empty church. Ben's caption appeared beneath the video. "Family first, always and forever." Constance had already commented, 3 champagne glass emojis and a heart. Joanna added, "Best night ever." "Love you all." Trevor's contribution was simpler. The Harrington legacy continues strong. Geyser stared at the screen until the image blurred, her eyes burning but refusing to produce tears because tears felt too small for what was erupting inside her chest. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a scheduling conflict or a miscommunication or a well-intentioned mistake. Ben had chosen to be there, surrounded by laughter and luxury and family warmth, while she stood in the cold, watching her mother's body prepare for burial. He'd chosen champagne over her tears, celebration over her grief, his family's Christmas party over the woman who'd loved him enough to reshape her entire world around his comfort. She thought about the morning, how he'd kissed her forehead before leaving for what he claimed was an urgent situation that needed handling. "I'll be there as soon as I can, baby. I promise. Just have to handle one critical thing first." She'd believed him because she'd spent 5 years believing him, convincing herself that his absences were necessary, his priorities were reasonable, his love was real, even when his actions suggested otherwise. She'd made excuses for him the same way she'd made his success possible, quietly, invisibly, without demanding acknowledgement or reciprocation. Her mother's voice echoed in memory, "You deserve so much more than what you've accepted." Father Michael touched her elbow softly. "Are you all right, my dear?" Geyser looked down at her mother's peaceful face, at the woman who'd cleaned other people's houses so her daughter could attend good schools, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so guys could have opportunities she'd been denied, who'd never asked for anything except that her daughter find happiness and love. Her mother had questioned the marriage from the beginning, gently suggesting that Ben seemed more interested in how Geyser made him feel about himself than in who she actually was as a person. Geyser had dismissed those concerns as maternal overprotection, as her mother not understanding the complexities of their relationship. Now, standing here alone, while her husband drank champagne and declared family the only thing that mattered, she understood her mother had seen clearly what she'd refused to acknowledge. "I'm fine, Father. Better than fine, actually. I'm finally seeing clearly." She opened the group chat again, her fingers surprisingly steady as they moved across the screen. The Harrington family was still posting comments on Ben's video, still celebrating their perfect evening together, still existing in their bubble of privilege and self-satisfaction. They had no idea what was about to happen, no comprehension that the foundation they'd built their lives upon was about to be removed, piece by careful piece, until everything they took for granted came crashing down around them. Gase typed 3 words, short, simple, powerful: withdraw everything. Effective immediately. She hit send and watched the message appear in the chat, sitting there innocent and cryptic among the champagne emojis and celebration photos. To them it would mean nothing. Random words from the wife they barely tolerated, the woman they'd never bothered to truly see. But across the city, in boardrooms and banks and offices that managed wealth they didn't understand, those 3 words would trigger consequences they couldn't imagine. Her phone lit up immediately. 3 dots appeared under her message. Someone was typing. The dots vanished, then reappeared. Ben had noticed. He was trying to formulate a response, probably confused, maybe annoyed that she'd interrupted their celebration with her strange message. Let him wonder. Let them all wonder. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and returned her attention to her mother's coffin. To the woman who deserved every bit of dignity and love guys could provide, even if she had to provide it alone. "We can begin now, Father. Just you, me, and my mother. That's all we need." As Father Michael opened his Bible and began reading words about eternal rest and everlasting peace, guys made silent promises to the woman in the coffin. Promises about remembering her worth. Promises about never again accepting less than she deserved. Promises about showing the people who dismissed her exactly what they'd lost when they chose champagne over compassion. The December wind howled harder against the windows, making the candle flames dance wildly. In the flickering light, her mother's face seemed almost to smile, as though approving of decisions not yet made, but already inevitable. Iggy's touched the coffin one final time, feeling the polished wood warm under her palm, and whispered, "I promise. Mama, they're going to learn what it means to stand alone in an empty room." Her phone vibrated again in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The messages were coming now, confusion turning to concern as the implications of her words began spreading through systems they didn't understand and couldn't control. But guys didn't check her phone. She stood through the service, listened to Father Michael's prayers, and let her grief transform into something sharper, colder, more powerful than tears could ever express. By the time they lowered her mother into the ground, her phone had received 17 messages. By the time she returned to her car, 34 missed calls blinked on her screen. By the time she drove away from the cemetery, the Harrington family's perfect Christmas celebration would be collapsing into chaos they couldn't explain or escape. Chapter 2: The Phantom Queen. The Mercedes smelled like funeral flowers and expensive leather, a combination that turned Guy's stomach as she navigated through evening traffic. She'd left the cemetery with dirt still clinging to her shoes, earth from her mother's grave that she couldn't bring herself to brush away. The car had been presented as a gift from Ben on their anniversary, complete with champagne and a speech about how she deserved beautiful things. She'd smiled and thanked him, never mentioning that the vehicle was registered under one of her holding companies, paid for with funds funneled through accounts he didn't know existed. Everything he'd given her, she'd actually provided for herself. Her phone continued its relentless performance, the screen lighting up with names and emotions she could predict with depressing accuracy. Ben had called 13 times now. Constance left 4 voicemails, her voice progressing from confused to demanding. Joanna sent a string of question marks, followed by increasingly frantic demands for explanations. Trevor's message was characteristically blunt. "What the hell are you talking about? Call me now." None of them understood yet. They were still operating from positions of assumed power, still believing they held control in whatever situation they imagined was unfolding. She drove past Harrington Industries headquarters, the gleaming tower that dominated the skyline. 70 stories of glass and steel, reflecting the winter sunset in shades of fire and blood. Ben's father had built the original enterprise through genuine innovation and careful strategy. Then the old man died, leaving everything to his son, who'd inherited ambition without the wisdom required to sustain it. Within 3 years, Ben had nearly destroyed what took decades to construct, making reckless expansions and arrogant assumptions that pushed the enterprise toward collapse. That's when Geyser had encountered him, at a charity auction where he'd been drinking too much and trying desperately to convince everyone he maintained perfect control. She'd watched him bid on items he couldn't afford, listened to him laugh too loudly at mediocre jokes, noticed how his smile never quite reached his eyes. Something about his desperation had touched her, sparked a desire to help this man who seemed to be drowning in expectations he couldn't meet. They'd talked that evening, really talked, and he'd lowered his defenses enough to admit he was struggling. Their courtship had been intense and swift, Ben sweeping her into his world with romantic gestures and declarations that felt genuine at the time. He'd told her she was different from others, that she saw him as a person rather than a name or a position. The irony of that statement haunted her now, considering her own wealth dwarfed his by magnitudes he'd never suspected. 3 months into their relationship, his situation had become critical. He'd broken down crying in her apartment, confessing that he was days from losing everything his father built, that he'd failed the family legacy, that he didn't know how to repair what he'd damaged. Guys had held him through his tears, her mind already working through solutions he couldn't see. The next day, she'd mentioned a friend from university who'd married someone influential in restructuring firms. The story was partially accurate. She did have a friend from university, LaToya, who now managed her entire financial empire from behind layers of corporate protection. One phone call to LaToya, and suddenly Ben's crushing obligations were restructured with terms that seemed miraculous. Interest rates dropped, payment schedules extended, and somehow investors materialized with capital at exactly the right moments. Ben had been ecstatic, declaring her his good luck charm. "How did your friend pull this off?" he'd asked, already more focused on results than mechanisms. She'd smiled and offered something vague about connections and timing, about how sometimes circumstances align when you need them most. He'd accepted the explanation because it solved his problem without challenging his ego. Over the following months, as more miraculous solutions appeared, she'd developed a repertoire of plausible stories. A professor who knew someone, a networking event where she'd met the right person, a chance encounter that led to an introduction. Ben never questioned why these coincidences happened with such convenient frequency. Pride prevented him from examining salvation too closely, from admitting he needed saving at all. He preferred to believe his own instincts were finally activating, that his father's genius had simply been dormant, waiting to emerge. Gase let him believe whatever helped him sleep peacefully. She'd built her fortune from absolutely nothing, developing technology patents that revolutionized data encryption, investing those earnings into real estate portfolios and silent partnerships across dozens of industries. Her net worth existed in shadows, managed through shell companies and trusts that even determined investigators would struggle to trace. She'd kept it all hidden because she wanted something money couldn't purchase. Genuine love, uncomplicated by greed or calculation. She'd wanted Ben to truly see her without the distortion wealth creates in relationships. She'd wanted to be chosen for herself, not for what she could provide. Driving past the building she'd secretly rescued multiple times, she understood the flaw in her logic now. Authentic connection cannot be built on a foundation of secrets. Hiding her power hadn't protected their love. It had simply allowed him to take her for granted, to treat her as decoration rather than partner, to dismiss her worth because he had no comprehension of what she was actually worth. Her phone rang again, Ben's name flashing insistently. She let it ring through, watching his attempts with detached curiosity. He was probably still at the party, surrounded by family who were starting to panic as their phones exploded with urgent messages from advisors and lawyers and banks. She imagined the scene. Champagne glasses abandoned, laughter dying into confused silence, everyone checking devices and trying to understand why their financial world was suddenly imploding. Guys pulled into the underground garage of their penthouse building, the exclusive tower, where only the wealthy and influential resided. Ben had signed the lease himself, proud to secure such prestigious space. He had no idea the entire building belonged to Guys through one of her holding companies, that she'd approved his application personally, amused by his swagger when requesting approval to rent what he already essentially owned through her. She rode the elevator up, watching floor numbers climb, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos she'd unleashed. Inside their penthouse, everything looked exactly as she'd left it this morning. Sterile, expensive, decorated according to Constance's suggestions rather than Guys's preferences. This had never truly been her home, just another space where she performed the role of Ben's wife. She walked through rooms filled with furniture that held no memories, artwork chosen by an interior designer who'd never asked what she actually liked, spaces that felt more like a showroom than a place where people lived and loved. She went to the study, the one room she'd claimed for herself, and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated with information that would terrify most people. Real-time feeds showing the cascade of financial consequences now rippling through the Harrington family's empire. Every loan she'd arranged was calling in early payment clauses she'd carefully embedded. Every investment she'd facilitated was withdrawing, based on conditions she'd deliberately triggered. Every contract she'd secured was dissolving through legal mechanisms she'd established precisely for this moment. LaToya's face appeared on a video call, her expression torn between admiration and concern. "Girl, when you said withdraw everything, you really meant everything. The Harrington accounts are in complete freefall. Every single one of them." "Good." Guys's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "You're sure about this? Once these dominoes finish falling, there's no putting them back up. The Harrington family will be exactly where they deserve to be," Guys interrupted. "Standing in the ruins of what they built on foundations they didn't understand and never appreciated. Let them feel what it's like when the ground disappears beneath their feet." LaToya nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud. Not of the revenge part necessarily, but of you finally standing up for yourself. She always said you were too good for that family." She was right about everything. Guys felt her eyes burn, but refused to let tears fall. "I should have listened to her from the beginning. So what happens now? They're going to figure out you're behind this eventually. Let them figure it out. I'm done hiding who I am to make other people comfortable. Done pretending to be less so they can feel like more. Done building empires for people who can't even show up to my mother's funeral." They talked for a while longer, LaToya confirming that every financial mechanism was executing exactly as planned. When they disconnected, Geyser sat in the quiet study, listening to the city sounds filtering through expensive windows. Her phone continued vibrating with messages she didn't read, calls she didn't answer. Somewhere across town, the Harrington Christmas party was transforming into a crisis management situation. Somewhere, Ben was probably starting to understand that his perfect world was collapsing. Somewhere, Constance was realizing that the woman she'd dismissed for 5 years held the power to destroy everything they'd taken for granted. Geyser closed her laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. She'd built all this power in secret, convinced that invisibility would protect her heart. Instead, it had only enabled people who didn't deserve her to use her without consequence. That ended today. That ended the moment she stood alone in an empty church and understood that some betrayals were too profound to forgive, some wounds too deep to heal, with apologies that would never come. Her phone rang again. Ben calling for what must have been the 20th time. She answered finally, her voice calm when she spoke. Yes. Geyser, thank God. What is happening? Everything is falling apart. The banks are calling loans. Investors are pulling out. Our lawyers don't understand what's triggering all these clauses. Did someone attack us? Do you know something? I know everything, Ben. That's what you never understood. I've always known everything. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications he was just beginning to grasp. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. What does that mean? Geyser, are you saying you're involved in this somehow? I'm not involved, Ben. I am this. Every dollar you thought you earned, every deal you thought you made, every success you thought was yours, it was all me, standing in the shadows, making you possible while you celebrated with your family and forgot your wife was burying her mother alone. The line went dead silent, except for his breathing, harsh and disbelieving. Then from somewhere in the background, she heard Constance's voice, demanding to know who he was talking to, what he was learning. You should get back to your party, Geyser said softly. Your family needs you. They just don't know yet that you need me far more than I ever needed any of you. She ended the call before he could respond, turned off her phone, and stood at the window watching the city lights blur into beautiful chaos. Just like the Harrington family's world was blurring into ruin they couldn't prevent or understand. Chapter 3. The collapse begins. Ben came through the penthouse door at 3 a.m, smelling of expensive cologne mixed with panic sweat, and champagne turned sour in his stomach. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, his jacket slung carelessly over one arm, his eyes wild with the kind of fear that comes from watching your entire world disintegrate without understanding why or how to stop it. Gay sat motionless in the living room, lights off, still wearing her black funeral dress, and when he saw her silhouette against the window overlooking the glittering city, he actually stumbled backward with a gasp. Jesus Christ. You scared me. His hand pressed against his chest dramatically, always performing even in crisis. Why are you sitting in the dark like that? I've been in the dark for 5 years. Ben, I'm just finally comfortable with it. Finally accepting what I should have seen from the beginning. He fumbled for the light switch, flooding the room with brightness that made them both wince against the sudden harshness. In the unforgiving illumination, he looked older than she'd ever seen him, the boyish charm that first attracted her completely stripped away to reveal something smaller and more frightened underneath. He dropped onto the couch across from her, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she'd once found endearing, but now recognized as manipulation. A physical display meant to generate sympathy. We need to talk about what you said on the phone. About being behind everything that's happening to us. His voice tried for authority, but landed somewhere closer to pleading. That doesn't make any sense. How could you possibly have the power or resources to... Because I'm worth $5 billion. Ben, because I've been running the empire you thought you built with your own hands and your father's legacy. Because every time you were about to fail, every time bankruptcy loomed, I stepped in and saved you. And you were too proud or too stupid or too self-absorbed to ever question how the miracles kept happening exactly when you needed them most. The words hung in the air between them like physical objects, solid and undeniable. Ben stared at her, his face cycling rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been anger if it wasn't so thoroughly mixed with terror. That's insane. You don't have $5 billion. You can't be... What, Ben? I can't be wealthy? I can't be powerful? I can't be intelligent enough to build something bigger than your father's legacy? She stood, walking toward him slowly, deliberately. Or do you mean I can't be all those things and still be the quiet wife who smiles politely at your family dinners while your mother makes comments about my background? And my mother never... Your mother called me Ben's unfortunate choice at last Christmas. I heard her tell Joanna that at least I was pretty enough to compensate for not being one of their kind. Your brother asked me at Thanksgiving if I'd finished my community college degree yet. And you laughed instead of correcting him when I actually have degrees from institutions he couldn't get into with all his family connections and donation money. Ben's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water and struggling to breathe in an element it wasn't designed for. She could see him trying to recalibrate everything he thought he knew, to fit this information into the worldview where he was the successful one and she was the lucky woman who'd married above her station. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying I believe it, but if it's true, why would you hide it? Why would you let you think you were the powerful one, the successful one, the one who saved the family legacy? Geisa laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut through steel. Because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my money. Because I was naive enough to believe that if you didn't know about my wealth, your love would be pure and uncomplicated. Turned out I was wrong. You didn't love me when you thought I was ordinary either. You just tolerated me because I was convenient and didn't make demands or challenge your self-perception. He shook his head violently, trying to reject what he was hearing. This is crazy. Even if you had money, you couldn't possibly be behind what's happening to my family. The banks, the investors, the contracts, those are massive institutions with protocols and regulations and oversight. One person can, when that person owns pieces of all those institutions. When that person has spent 5 years carefully building legal structures specifically designed to support you and yours. When that person embedded clauses and conditions that could be triggered with a single phone call. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him struggle with reality. I didn't just save your company, Ben. I became its foundation. And now I've removed that foundation. The rest is just gravity doing what gravity does. His phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table, another call he ignored out of fear or denial. It had been buzzing constantly since he arrived home. His family no doubt demanding updates, explanations, solutions he didn't have and couldn't provide. My lawyers say there's some kind of coordinated attack. Multiple shell companies pulling support simultaneously, all of them untraceable to any known entity. They're untraceable because I designed them that way with the best legal minds money can buy. Every single one of those shell companies ultimately belongs to me. The bank that's calling your loans? I own 12% of it. The investment firm withdrawing capital. I'm the silent partner who made their biggest deal possible. The clients canceling contracts. I introduced you to them in the first place through my networking connections. Remember? The color drained from his face as the full scope of her control became clear, as he understood that his entire life had been built on foundations he never knew existed. You can't do this. There are laws, regulations, all of which I've followed perfectly. Every withdrawal, every clause activation, every contract termination is completely legal. I built you up legally, and I'm taking it down the same way. The only difference is now you know who's behind it. Why? The question came out broken, stripped of all pretense. Even if I screwed up, even if I should have come to the funeral, does that really deserve destroying my entire family? My mother, my brother, my sister, they didn't do anything to you. They didn't do anything for me either, Ben. Not one thing in 5 years of marriage. Your mother made me feel small at every opportunity. Your sister looked through me like I was invisible furniture. Your brother treated me like hired help brought in for events. And you let them do it over and over, because standing up for your wife might have made your mommy uncomfortable. Ben stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal desperate for escape. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I should have come to the funeral. I should have stood up to my family more. I should have been a better husband. But please, guys, we can fix this. We can go to marriage counseling. I can change. We can rebuild what we had. Stop. The word cracked like a whip through the air. Don't insult both of us by pretending you want to change. You want to stop the bleeding. You want your money back. You want your comfortable life restored, where you're the golden son and I'm the grateful wife. But you don't actually want me, Ben. You never did. You wanted what I could provide, even when you didn't know how much that was. His pacing stopped abruptly. He turned to face her, and she could see the exact moment his fear transformed into something uglier, something resentful. If you're so powerful, if you're so much better than all of us, why did you marry me? Why did you waste 5 years playing house with someone you clearly think is beneath you? Because I loved you. The words hurt coming out, sharp-edged truth she'd been avoiding for months. I genuinely loved the man I thought you were. The man who held my hand on our 3rd date and told me I made him want to be better. The man who cried in my apartment about failing his father's legacy and actually seemed humble enough to learn and grow. But that man was a performance, wasn't he? A role you played until you got what you needed. That's not fair. Fair? Her voice rose for the first time, breaking through the calm she'd maintained. You want to talk about fair? I stood alone in a church today, burying the woman who sacrificed everything for me, while you drank champagne and posted videos about family being the only thing that matters. Don't you dare talk to me about fair. Ben's phone buzzed again, and this time he grabbed it desperately, reading whatever message just came through. His face went even paler, if that was possible. They're saying we'll be completely bankrupt within a week. That there's no way to stop the cascade, no miracle solution this time. Is that true? Probably. I built everything you have. Without me, you're what you've always actually been, a man with a famous last name and not much else to recommend him. He looked at her like she'd physically struck him, like the truth was a violence he couldn't defend against or deflect. What do you want, money? Do you want me to pay you back somehow? There has to be something you want from me. I want you to feel what I felt today. Utterly alone, completely dismissed, standing in ruins, and realizing that the people you thought cared about you were just using you for what you could provide. She walked toward the bedroom door. I'm filing for divorce. Your lawyers can contact mine. And Ben, the prenuptial agreement your mother insisted on means you'll walk away with exactly what you brought to this marriage, which is nothing. Geyser, please. She closed the bedroom door on his pleading, locked it firmly, and finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. On the other side, she could hear him making frantic phone calls, his voice rising and falling as he tried to explain to his family what he'd just learned. Let him explain. Let them all scramble and panic, and realize that the woman they'd dismissed held the power to destroy them. Let them understand, too late, that some foundations can't be repaired once they're deliberately removed. She changed out of her funeral dress, hanging it carefully in the closet, where it would remain as a monument to this day. It would be the last thing she wore as Ben Harrington's wife. Tomorrow, she'd start the process of becoming Geyser Green again, the woman her mother raised, the woman who built empires in secret and didn't need anyone's approval or appreciation, the woman who knew her worth even when everyone around her forgot. Chapter 4. The Stranger's Kindness. The cemetery looked different in morning light, softer somehow, the harsh edges of grief smoothed by sunshine that felt inappropriate for mourning. Gaze knelt in the grass beside her mother's fresh grave, placing white roses because those had been her favorite. She hadn't slept after Ben finally gave up trying to talk through the locked bedroom door. She'd just lain awake listening to him make calls, his voice progressing from panic to desperation, to something close to acceptance as the night wore on. Around dawn, she'd heard him leave the penthouse, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. She didn't care where he went. Their marriage had ended the moment he chose champagne over her tears, even if the paperwork would take longer to finalize. She'd showered, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, and driven here because this was the only place that felt real anymore. "Mama, I kept my promise," she whispered, running her fingers over the temporary marker. The permanent headstone would take weeks to create, but even this simple marker felt sacred because it bore her mother's name. "I'm remembering my worth. I'm finally standing up for myself, just like you always wanted. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." The voice startled her, deep and gentle, coming from someone standing a respectful distance away. She turned to see a man holding his own flowers, his eyes red-rimmed from crying, his suit slightly rumpled like he'd slept in it or maybe hadn't slept at all. He gestured apologetically toward a neighboring grave. "My father is buried right there. I come most mornings, talk to him like he can still hear me. Probably sounds strange." "Not strange at all." Geyser stood brushing grass from her knees. "I think they can hear us. I hope they can anyway." He nodded, stepping closer but maintaining respectful distance. "And Peter Noah, I've seen you here before, the other day at the service. I wanted to offer my condolences, but it felt intrusive. I appreciate that. And guys," she didn't add her married name, "didn't want the Harrington attached to her here in this place that was about truth and grief and her mother's memory." Peter moved to his father's grave, kneeling to arrange his flowers with careful attention. Dad died suddenly. Heart attack while he was working. He was a carpenter, spent his whole life building things for other people, making sure every joint was perfect and every measurement precise. He taught me that quality matters more than speed, that you build things right or you don't build them at all. He sounds wonderful. "Your mother?" "Passed when I was young, cancer. Dad raised me alone, did the best he could. Taught me everything he knew about construction, about integrity, about treating people with kindness, because that's what makes life worth living." Peter's voice cracked slightly. "I miss him every single day." They sat in companionable silence, two people who understood that grief didn't need constant conversation, that sometimes presence was enough. Grace found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. This stranger demanded nothing from her, expected nothing, just existed in his own sorrow while allowing her to exist in hers. "Your service the other day," Peter said finally. "I noticed no one else came. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was revealing more than difficult. Turns out the people I thought were my family couldn't be bothered to show up when it actually mattered." Their loss. "Anyone who would abandon you during something like that doesn't deserve your presence during the good times." The words were simple, but they hit Guys with unexpected force, validating something she'd been feeling but hadn't quite articulated. "That's exactly right. I've been making excuses for them for so long, convincing myself their behavior was acceptable, that I was expecting too much. But I wasn't. I was just expecting basic human decency." Peter stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Listen, I don't want to overstep, but you look like someone who could use a friend. And I know from experience that grief can be isolating, especially when the people who should support you aren't there." He pulled out his phone. "Would it be okay to exchange numbers? Not for anything weird, just as someone who understands what you're going through. Someone you can talk to if you need it." Guys hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because accepting his offer felt like admitting she needed support, that she was vulnerable. But maybe vulnerability wasn't weakness. Maybe it was just honesty. She pulled out her own phone. "I'd like that, actually." They exchanged numbers and then stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to end this unexpected connection. Finally, Peter smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen in longer than she could remember. Warm, uncomplicated, asking for nothing except the possibility of kindness shared between two wounded people. "I should let you finish your visit. But Geyser, take care of yourself. Grief is hard enough without carrying other people's failures too." He walked away, leaving her standing beside her mother's grave, with her phone in her hand and something unfamiliar unfolding in her chest. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Recognition that connection could exist without transaction, that someone could offer support without expecting something in return. That maybe the Harrington family's treatment of her wasn't the standard she should accept as normal. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Ben calling again. Probably with more begging or demands or attempts to negotiate. She declined the call without guilt. Whatever he wanted could wait. She was here with her mother in a moment of peace she hadn't expected to find, holding a stranger's phone number that felt like possibility. "I think you'd like him, Mama," she whispered to the grave. "He seems kind, really kind, not performative kind. The kind you always said I should look for, instead of settling for good-looking and charming." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees overhead, and Geyser chose to interpret it as her mother's approval. She stayed another hour, talking about Peter, about the Harrington family's collapse, about the divorce she'd be filing, about the life she was going to build now that she'd stopped hiding who she was. And for the first time since her mother died, Geiss felt something besides grief and anger. She felt hope. Chapter 5. The Harrington Family Reckoning. Constance Harrington's mansion looked smaller somehow, diminished by the crisis unfolding within its walls. Guise pulled up to the circular driveway, parking between luxury vehicles that would likely be repossessed within days. She'd been summoned here through a series of increasingly frantic messages from Ben, culminating in his mother calling personally with barely concealed desperation, masquerading as authority. "We need to discuss this family matter immediately. Your presence is required." Gutchis had almost laughed at the word required, as though Constance still held any power over her decisions. But curiosity won out. She wanted to see their faces when they tried to demand things from someone they'd spent years dismissing. Wanted to watch them scramble now that they understood who actually held the cards. She rang the doorbell instead of using the key she'd never been officially given, despite being married into the family for 5 years. Trevor answered, his usual arrogance replaced by barely controlled panic. "About time. Everyone's waiting in the study." He led her through halls, decorated with portraits of Harrington ancestors, all those severe faces that had always seemed to judge her for not being born into the right family. Now she walked past them with her head high, knowing that every painting, every piece of expensive furniture, every crystal chandelier hung by threads she controlled. The study was full. Constance sat behind the massive desk like a queen holding court, though her usual composure had cracks showing around the edges. Joanna perched on the leather sofa, her designer outfit unable to hide the fear in her eyes. Ben stood by the window, refusing to look at Guys directly. Various cousins and in-laws filled the remaining chairs, all of them watching her enter with expressions ranging from hostile to desperate. "Thank you for coming." "Giza," Constance's voice dripped with false warmth. "We have some concerns we need to address as a family." "I'm not your family, Constance. I'm the woman your son married, but you've made it very clear over the years that I don't actually belong in this room." The older woman's smile froze, not expecting such directness. "Now there's no need to be dramatic. We've always welcomed you. You've tolerated me. There's a difference." Geyser remained standing, refusing to sit and put herself at a lower position. "What do you want?" Joanna stood abruptly, her composure shattering. "We want to know why you're destroying us. Our lawyers traced the financial collapse back to shell companies and trusts that all seem to connect to you somehow. They can't prove it yet, but the timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Maybe I'm just that good at covering my tracks. This isn't a joke." Trevor slammed his hand on the desk. "Do you understand what you've done? My accounts are frozen. Joanna's suppliers are demanding immediate payment she can't make. Mother might lose this house. Ben's company will be liquidated by the end of the week." "You've destroyed us!" I removed my support. "There's a difference." Guys walked to the window, looking out at gardens she'd paid to maintain without anyone knowing. "Everything you have, everything you've built over the past 5 years, was constructed on a foundation I provided. I was the safety net you never knew existed. And now that I've removed that net, you're falling. That's not destruction. That's just gravity." Constance stood, her mask of civility finally cracking completely. You think you're so clever, don't you? Some nobody who married my son and now wants to play games with family you don't understand. We have lawyers, connections, resources. You have nothing. Guys turned to face them all. You have lawyers you can't afford to pay. Connections who stop returning calls when they realize you're broke. Resources that only existed because I made them possible. You want to know who I really am? I'm worth $5 billion. I own pieces of companies across 37 industries. I have patents that generate passive income while I sleep. I built an empire from absolute nothing. And then I built your empire too, because I loved your son and wanted to help him succeed. The room went silent, every person staring at her with identical expressions of disbelief. Ben finally spoke, his voice hollow. I told them. They didn't believe me. Why would we believe that? Joanna's voice was sharp. You're telling us, the woman we've known for 5 years, the quiet little wife who never said much at family dinners, is secretly a billionaire. That's insane. What's insane is that none of you ever asked me a single meaningful question about myself. You never wondered what I did before I met Ben, never showed any interest in my education or my work. You just assumed I was ordinary because I wasn't born into your world. Well, congratulations on your assumptions. They've cost you everything. Constance sank back into her chair, age suddenly visible on her face. Why would you hide such wealth? What possible reason? Because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for what I could provide. Because I'd seen what money does to relationships, how it distorts everything. Because I was naive enough to believe that if Ben didn't know about my wealth, his love would be real. Geyser felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall in front of these people. Turns out I was wrong. He didn't love me when he thought I was ordinary either. That's not true, Ben said weakly. I did love you. I do love you. You love what I made possible. You love the success you thought was yours. You love having a wife who didn't challenge you or make demands. But me, the actual person I am, you never bothered to know her. Trevor stood, attempting intimidation that no longer worked. You can't just destroy an entire family because your feelings got hurt. There are legal consequences for what you've done. Everything I did was completely legal. Every withdrawal, every clause activation, every contract termination followed protocols I established legally years ago. Your lawyers know this already, which is why they're telling you there's nothing actionable. I built you up within the law, and I'm taking it down the same way. What about the others? Constance gestured to the room. Joanna's children, your nieces and nephews? Trevor's wife? They didn't do anything to you. Do they deserve to suffer for Ben's mistakes? They benefited from those mistakes for years without question. They enjoyed the wealth that my invisible support created. They attended parties and took vacations and lived in luxury built on foundations they didn't understand. Now they'll learn what life looks like without those foundations. Consider it an education. Geyser walked toward the door, done with this conversation, done with these people who'd never valued her. At the threshold, she turned back. I stood alone in a church burying my mother while you all celebrated together. You chose champagne over compassion, parties over pain, your comfort over my grief. Now you know how it feels to stand alone in ruins and realize the people you counted on were never really there at all. She left them sitting in their study, in their mansion that would soon belong to someone else, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who'd be ashamed to see how far their descendants had fallen. And she felt nothing but relief at leaving that chapter of her life behind. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The divorce lawyer's office smelled like expensive wood and old books, the kind of place that radiated respectability and discretion earned through decades of handling wealthy people's messy secrets. Geyser sat across from Janet Krause, a woman whose reputation for ruthless efficiency in high-stakes divorces made her the obvious choice for someone who needed this done quickly and completely. Janet reviewed the prenuptial agreement Constance had insisted on 5 years ago. The document meant to protect the Harrington fortune from a woman they considered beneath them, a gold digger who needed to be contained. The pages rustled as Janet flipped through them, occasionally making notes in margins already filled with her sharp observations and legal strategies. "This is almost too perfect," Janet said, unable to hide her amusement as a slow smile spread across her face. Her reading glasses caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "They drafted this to ensure you couldn't access Harrington wealth in a divorce. But since all the actual wealth was yours anyway, hidden through shell companies and trusts they never knew existed, this agreement essentially guarantees Ben walks away with nothing, while you retain everything you secretly built. I've seen irony in my career, seen plenty of poetic justice, but this is exceptional. This is masterclass level. Irony is sometimes kind." Gaze signed the papers. Janet slid across the polished mahogany desk, her signature flowing with the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped second-guessing her worth or her decisions. "How long until this is final? Given that Ben has no resources to fight and every reason to want this over quickly, I'd estimate 3 months. Maybe less if he cooperates fully and doesn't try anything desperate. He'll sign anything at this point. His lawyers have already indicated he understands fighting would only make things worse for him financially. They're advising complete cooperation and quick resolution." "Good." Geyser stood, ready to leave this office and this legal formality behind. The weight she'd been carrying felt lighter with each step toward the door, each moment that moved her further from the Harrington name and everything it represented. One more thing. Janet leaned back in her leather chair, studying Geyser with professional curiosity mixed with genuine admiration. She removed her reading glasses and set them carefully on the desk. "I've handled a lot of divorces in my 30 years of practice, seen every type of breakup imaginable. Messy affairs with multiple mistresses, bitter custody battles that destroy children, vindictive asset hiding that requires forensic accountants to unravel. But I've never seen someone dismantle an entire family's financial empire with such surgical precision. You didn't just leave your husband. You systematically destroyed everything he thought he'd built, and you did it so legally, so perfectly, that they have absolutely no recourse. It's brilliant, actually. Brutal, but brilliant. I removed the foundation I'd been providing without their knowledge or appreciation. What they built on that foundation was always unstable. I just stopped hiding that instability from them, stopped protecting them from their own poor decisions and inflated sense of importance." "Was it worth it? The revenge, I mean. Does watching them suffer bring you peace or closure? I've had clients who got their revenge and found it hollow." Geyser considered the question seriously, turning it over in her mind like an object being examined from all angles. She'd asked herself the same thing late at night when sleep wouldn't come. It wasn't revenge. Revenge implies I wanted to hurt them for the sake of causing pain, for satisfaction. This was consequences. They spent 5 years treating me like I didn't matter, like my feelings and my presence were negotiable, like my grief was less important than their champagne toasts and social status. I just showed them what happens when someone they dismissed actually stops participating in their success. Was it worth it? Ask me again when the divorce is final and I've had time to build something new from what I've learned about myself. She left the office and walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, texting Peter Noah before she could overthink it or talk herself out of reaching for connection. His response came immediately, a coffee cup emoji and an address she recognized from one of their previous conversations. They'd been texting regularly since their cemetery meeting, conversations that started about grief and expanded to everything else, childhood memories that shaped them, favorite books that changed their perspectives, thoughts on life and meaning, and what matters when everything else falls away. His messages were never demanding, never fishing for information about her wealth or her plans, just genuine exchanges between 2 people, learning each other's minds without pretense. Peter was already at a corner table when she arrived. his face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing her walk through the door. That simple expression of happiness at her presence still caught her off guard every time, still made something flutter uncertainly in her chest. Ben had never looked at her that way, even in their early days when everything felt new. He'd looked at her with desire, with need, with the relief of finding someone who solved his problems, but never with uncomplicated joy at her existence, never with the sense that her presence alone was gift enough. "You look lighter," Peter said as she sat down, sliding a cup of tea toward her. He'd remembered her preference without being told, had ordered it before she arrived. "Something good happened today? Filed for divorce. Signed all the papers. It should be final in a few months, maybe sooner, if Ben cooperates and doesn't try to drag it out for spite. How do you feel about that? Really feel, not what you think you should feel or what people expect you to feel." "Relieved, mostly. I thought I'd feel sadder, like I was giving up on something that mattered. Like ending a marriage should hurt more than this, should feel more significant and devastating. But it turns out you can't give up on something that never really existed in the first place. I'm mourning what I thought we had, not what we actually had. There's a difference I'm only now beginning to understand." Peter nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, taking his time before responding, because he never rushed conversations or pushed for quick resolutions. "My dad used to take me to renovation projects, old houses that looked beautiful from the outside, but were rotting underneath the paint and wallpaper. He'd point out the difference between cosmetic damage and structural failure. He said that some buildings look solid from the outside, stable and permanent, but when you examine the foundation, you find nothing but rot and instability. He said the kindest thing you can do in that situation is demolish it completely and start fresh, rather than trying to live in something that's fundamentally unsound. Otherwise, you're just waiting for it to collapse around you, possibly at the worst possible moment." Your father was wise. He understood that some things can't be repaired, only replaced with something better built on honest foundations. He was. I think about him every day. Wonder what he'd say about the choices I'm making, the person I'm becoming without his guidance to keep me grounded. Peter looked directly at her, his eyes holding something careful and honest. He'd tell me not to rush into anything with someone who's still healing from a broken marriage. He'd say to be patient, to let friendship develop naturally without pressure or expectations, to not mistake the intensity of grief for something else that might fade when the grief lifts. Geyser felt her chest tighten, understanding what he was really saying beneath the words, appreciating his honesty even as it complicated her own confused feelings. "That's wise advice. Very wise." "It is. But he'd also tell me not to let fear prevent me from recognizing something real when it appears. That life is short and unpredictable, and genuine connections are rare enough that you have to pay attention when they show up. That sometimes the right person arrives at the wrong time, and you have to trust that if it's real, it'll wait until the timing improves." They looked at each other across the table, something unspoken passing between them that felt more intimate than touch. Not promises or expectations, just acknowledgement that what was growing here mattered, that it deserved careful attention and honest exploration, that rushing would damage something that could become extraordinary if given proper time to develop. "I'm not ready for anything complicated," Guys said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm still processing the end of my marriage, still figuring out who I am outside of being Ben's wife. Still learning to trust my own judgment after making such a massive mistake in choosing him in the first place." "I know. I'm not asking for complicated. I'm just asking for this. Coffee, conversation, honesty between two people who've both loved and lost and are trying to figure out what comes next. No expectations beyond showing up and being genuine with each other." "I can do that. I want to do that." "Then that's enough for now. More than enough, actually." They talked for hours, the coffee shop filling and emptying around them while they remained in their corner. building something new from honesty and shared grief, and the possibility that healing might look like opening up rather than closing off. They discussed books that had shaped them, music that moved them to tears or joy, moments from childhood that explained who they'd become as adults. Peter told her about learning carpentry from his father, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional with his own hands, about how physical work could be meditation when approached with the right mindset. Guise told him about her mother's sacrifices, about building her empire in secret while everyone around her assumed she was ordinary, but finally understanding that hiding her power had been its own kind of prison that kept out authentic connection. When they finally parted, the sun already setting and casting long shadows across the parking lot, Peter hugged her, brief, respectful, but warm enough to remind her that touch could be comforting rather than demanding, that physical affection didn't have to come with strings attached or expectations embedded. His arms felt solid and safe in a way that didn't trigger her defenses or make her calculate what he might want in return. Driving home, Guise checked her phone to find 17 messages from various Harringtons, all of them following the same arc, from anger to bargaining to desperation. Ben's messages pleaded for one more conversation, one more chance to explain. Constance's voicemails demanded explanations she'd already provided multiple times. Trevor sent threats he couldn't back up without money for lawyers. Joanna wrote essays about family loyalty from someone who'd never shown her any. She deleted them all without reading beyond the previews. That chapter was closed. Whatever happened to them now was their responsibility to manage without her invisible support. At her penthouse, she'd already changed the locks, removed Ben's belongings to storage, reclaimed the space as her own, with new furniture and artwork she actually liked. She sat by the window watching the city lights emerge as dusk deepened into night. She called LaToya, needing to hear the voice of someone who'd known her before and during and now after the Harrington era, someone who understood all the versions of herself she'd been. "How you holding up?" LaToya asked without preamble, her voice warm with concern and affection. "Better than I expected. The divorce is moving forward smoothly. Ben's family is imploding in exactly the ways I predicted. And I met someone, though it's too early to call it anything more than friendship, too fragile to define or categorize. Someone good, someone who deserves you, someone real, someone who asks about my thoughts and feelings instead of what I can do for him. Someone whose father taught him that quality matters more than appearance, that building things right is more important than building them fast. Someone who makes me feel seen without making me feel exposed or used. Your mama would like him. She'd say he sounds like someone worth knowing." Yeah, she would. Guise felt tears finally come, but they felt cleaner than the grief-soaked tears of earlier days, more like release than breakdown. "I miss her, LaToya. I miss her so much it physically hurts sometimes. I know, baby. But she'd be proud of you right now. Standing up for yourself, walking away from people who didn't deserve you, opening yourself to new possibilities instead of closing off completely. That's exactly what she wanted for you. She always said you deserved someone who celebrated you instead of tolerating you." They talked until exhaustion finally claimed Guise, pulling her toward sleep that came easier than it had in weeks. Tomorrow she'd continue building her new life, brick by brick, decision by decision. But tonight she let herself rest in the space between endings and beginnings, trusting that whatever came next would be better than what she'd left behind. That her mother's death hadn't been the end of everything, but rather the beginning of her finally choosing herself. Chapter 7, The Weight of Power, the coffee shop. Peter had chosen was nothing like the places. Ben preferred no marble counters or designer furniture, just worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs that had been loved into comfort by years of use. Morning light streamed through windows that needed cleaning, creating patterns on the floor that shifted as clouds moved overhead. Guise arrived early, ordering tea instead of her usual coffee, because her stomach had been unsettled lately, stress manifesting physically in ways she couldn't ignore. She sat in the corner they'd claimed as theirs through repetition, watching people come and go with their rushed orders and distracted faces, everyone moving through their own private dramas she'd never know. Peter showed up exactly on time, carrying a brown paper bag that smelled wonderfully of cinnamon and something warm and fresh from the oven. "Homemade muffins," he explained, setting them on the table between them with the care of someone presenting something meaningful. "Baked them this morning because I couldn't sleep and needed to do something with my hands. Fair warning, they might be terrible. Carpentry is my skill, not baking. My father used to joke that I could build a perfect cabinet but couldn't bake a decent cookie to save my life. He said I approached baking like construction, too precise, not enough intuition." She took one, bit into it, and smiled genuinely at the slightly lopsided but absolutely delicious result. The muffin was still warm, melting in her mouth with flavors that spoke of real ingredients and actual care. "These are wonderful. What couldn't you sleep about?" "Honestly?" "You not in a creepy way," he added quickly, concern flashing across his face. "Just thinking about everything you've been through recently, wondering if our friendship is helping or if I'm adding pressure you don't need. Wondering if spending time with me is genuine healing or just a distraction from processing what you should be processing alone. You're helping. More than you know." She finished the muffin, savoring the simple kindness of homemade food given without expectation or strings attached. "Can I ask you something potentially uncomfortable?" "Anything. Always anything. Why are you interested in me? I mean really interested, beneath the surface explanations. Most people, when they find out about my wealth, either get weird and possessive or weird and intimidated. They start calculating what they can get from me, or they start withdrawing because they feel inadequate. But you've never asked about it, never seemed impressed or threatened. You treat me exactly the same as you did before you knew. Why?" Peter took his time answering, clearly considering his words carefully, the way he always did when something mattered. He set down his coffee, met her eyes directly. "My dad used to take me to job sites, show me houses we were building from foundation to finish. He'd point out the difference between houses built to impress and houses built to last. The impressive ones had fancy facades and expensive finishes, imported materials and designer touches, but sometimes the bones underneath weren't sound. They looked beautiful in photos, but would develop problems within years. The lasting ones might look ordinary from outside, but the foundation was solid, the craftsmanship was genuine. Every joint was perfect, even in places no one would ever see. He taught me to value what's underneath more than what's visible, to judge quality by integrity rather than appearance." "That's a lovely metaphor, but I'm still asking about me specifically. About why you keep showing up when you could walk away without obligation. You sat alone in a cemetery, talking to your mother's grave, with more honesty and vulnerability than most people show their therapists. You helped your husband for years, without demanding recognition or appreciation. You're dealing with the end of your marriage by moving forward with grace, instead of drowning in bitterness. You build people up instead of tearing them down. Those things tell me who you are at your core. The money is just what you have, not who you are. Does that make sense?" Geisa felt something crack open in her chest, some protection she'd been maintaining without realizing it, some wall she'd built to keep people at a safe distance. "Ben used to say things like that. In the beginning, he'd talk about loving me for myself, about how I was different from other women. But it was always performance, always words designed to make me feel special, so I'd keep solving his problems without asking questions or expecting appreciation. I can't control how you interpret my words, based on how someone else's lies hurt you. That's not something I can fix or argue away. But I can be consistent, which is all I'm promising. I'll show up when I say I will. I'll be honest even when it's uncomfortable. And I won't pretend to be something I'm not just to keep you around, because that would be insulting to both of us." They sat quietly for a while, the coffee shop bustling around them, with early morning customers grabbing their orders and rushing out to whatever demanded their attention. Conversations swirled around them, fragments of other people's lives creating white noise that somehow made their silence more intimate. Finally, Geyser spoke again, shifting the conversation to safer territory while still maintaining the honesty they'd established. "Tell me about your construction company. You've mentioned it but never given details, like you're worried I'll judge it somehow or find it less impressive than my own work." Peter laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "It's nothing impressive by your standards, nothing that would make headlines or generate millions. Small operation, maybe a dozen employees when we're busy. We build custom homes for people who care more about quality than showing off. I inherited it from my dad, kept his principles, kept his commitment to doing things right, even when cutting corners would be more profitable. We're not getting rich, but we're making a living doing work that matters. Work that helps families build something lasting." That sounds exactly impressive by any actual standard. Building something that matters, maintaining integrity when it would be easier to compromise, creating homes people will love for decades instead of just selling them houses that look good in photos. That's more valuable than making quick money and forgetting about quality the moment the contract is signed. Coming from someone worth billions, that's quite a compliment. I wasn't sure how you'd view what I do compared to your empire. Coming from someone who built those billions by recognizing genuine value wherever it appears, it's just truth. I've met plenty of people with impressive titles and empty souls. You have substance, Peter, that matters more than scale or recognition." She paused, gathering courage for something she needed to say, needed him to understand before they moved any further forward. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to be honest about how it makes you feel, even if your honesty might hurt." "Okay, I'm listening." "The Harrington family is completely collapsing because I removed all the support I'd been providing secretly for years. They're losing everything, homes, businesses, social standing, and I'm the reason. I deliberately engineered their destruction because they abandoned me when I needed them most. Ben's mother might end up homeless. His nieces and nephews had to change schools. His brother's wife left him because of the financial stress. Does that bother you? Does it make you see me differently? Does it make you wonder if I'm capable of doing the same thing to you someday?" Peter considered seriously before answering, his expression thoughtful rather than immediately reassuring. "Was what you did legal?" "Completely. Every action followed protocols I established legally years before." "Were they good people who didn't deserve consequences?" "They were privileged people who treated me terribly for years and never appreciated what I provided. They looked down on me, insulted me, dismissed me, and then couldn't even bother to show up when my mother died. Then no, it doesn't bother me. I don't believe in revenge for its own sake, but I do believe in natural consequences. You removed artificial support, and they're experiencing the reality they'd been avoiding. That's not cruelty, that's honesty. That's them finally facing the truth about what they built on your invisible foundation. Some people would call it vindictive. Some people would say I went too far, that destroying an entire family over one missed funeral is disproportionate and cruel. Some people have never stood alone at their mother's funeral while the people who should support them celebrate without them. Some people have never been dismissed and belittled for years while secretly holding all the power. I don't judge you for setting boundaries, even when those boundaries have significant consequences. You gave them years to treat you decently, and they chose not to. This is what happens when someone finally stops accepting mistreatment. They talked until the morning shifted into afternoon, until Guys realized she'd missed 3 calls from her divorce lawyer, and Peter had to leave for a job site inspection. Walking to their cars in the parking lot behind the coffee shop, he turned to her with a question that had clearly been building throughout their conversation. "I'm teaching a carpentry workshop at the community center this weekend for teenagers who are interested in construction but don't have access to the tools or training. Kids who've been told they're not smart enough for real careers, so they might as well give up on their dreams. Would you want to come?" Not as a date, just as someone who might enjoy seeing what I do, seeing how I try to give back to kids who remind me of myself at that age. I'd love that, really love that. He smiled, and she noticed again how his entire face transformed with genuine emotion, how there was no calculation behind his expressions, no hidden agenda lurking beneath his kindness. Saturday morning, then. Fair warning, you might end up covered in sawdust and smelling like wood stain by the end. It's messy work. I'll risk it. Sounds perfect, actually. Driving away, Guys felt something unfamiliar settling into her chest. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of happiness. The sense that maybe healing didn't require isolation, that maybe opening herself to connection could coexist with protecting her heart from further damage. Peter Noah wasn't a solution to her problems or a replacement for the marriage she'd lost. He was just himself, offering friendship without agenda and showing her through consistent action that kindness could be genuine rather than strategic, that someone could want her company without wanting something from her. Her phone rang. Ben's lawyer, probably with questions about asset division or timeline adjustments. She answered professionally, handled the conversation efficiently, and ended the call without emotional turmoil. The Harrington chapter was closing page by page, and she was ready for whatever story came next, whatever life she chose to build from the ashes of what she deliberately burned down. Chapter 8. The Price of Betrayal. Constance appeared in the lobby of Guys's building, somehow talking her way past security, despite being explicitly banned from the premises. The doorman looked apologetic as Guys approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. She insisted it was an emergency, ma'am. Said she needed just 5 minutes. I told her you'd given instructions, but it's fine, Thomas. I'll handle it. Guys turned to her mother-in-law, taking in her appearance with clinical detachment. Constance looked diminished, without her usual armor of expensive clothing and professional styling. The woman standing in the marble lobby wore discount store clothes and desperation. Thank you for seeing me. Constance's voice trembled, her composure finally shattered completely. I know you have no reason to, but please, just hear me out. Guys gestured toward a quiet corner, away from the security desk and the curious eyes of other residents. You have 5 minutes. We're losing everything. The house will be foreclosed next week. Trevor's already filed for bankruptcy. Joanna's business is completely gone. Ben is living in a motel and working wherever they'll hire him without checking references. Constance's hands shook as she spoke. I'm not asking you to restore everything. I know that's not possible. But please, if there's any mercy in you, give us enough to survive. Just enough to avoid complete destitution. Why should I? No, because we're family. Because you loved Ben once. Because... Don't. Guys's voice was sharp enough to cut through Constance's pleading. Don't talk to me about family. You made it very clear over 5 years that I wasn't family, that I was an inconvenient addition you tolerated because Ben insisted. You made jokes about my background, dismissed my intelligence, treated me like hired help at your parties. And when my mother died, when I needed family most, not one of you showed up. Constance's face crumpled. I know we treated you badly, and I'm sorrier than I can express. But does that really justify destroying us completely? We made mistakes, but we don't deserve to lose everything. You didn't lose anything. I simply stopped giving you what you never knew you had. The wealth you're mourning was always mine, built on my intelligence and my work. You just got to enjoy it while pretending it was yours. Please, the word came out broken. I'm begging you, not for me, but for my grandchildren. For Joanna's kids, who don't understand why they had to leave their school and their house. For Trevor's daughter, who's terrified because her parents fight constantly about money. They're innocent in all this. They benefited from the wealth I provided for years. They enjoyed privileges built on my invisible support. Now they're learning what life looks like without those advantages. That's not cruelty. That's reality for millions of children whose families don't have secret billionaires propping them up. You're really going to let children suffer because you're angry at adults. I'm going to let children experience the natural consequences of their family's choices. Maybe it'll teach them humility and gratitude, lessons their parents clearly never learned. Geiser stood, done with this conversation. Your 5 minutes are up. Wait, please. Constance grabbed her arm, then immediately released it when Geiser's expression hardened. What do you want? There must be something we can do to earn your forgiveness, some way to make this right. You can't make it right, Constance. You can't give me back the mother you didn't show up to mourn. You can't erase 5 years of small cruelties and deliberate dismissals. You can't retroactively treat me with the respect I deserved from the beginning. All you can do now is learn to live with the consequences of your choices. So that's it. You'll just watch us become homeless, destitute, destroyed. I'll do what you did when my mother was dying. Absolutely nothing. I'll focus on my own life, my own healing, my own future. You'll figure out how to survive without me the same way I figured out how to thrive without you ever believing in me. Constance's face hardened, grief transforming into something uglier. You think you're so superior, don't you? So much better than us because you built your wealth instead of inheriting it. But destroying people who wronged you doesn't make you strong. It makes you cruel. Coming from someone who spent 5 years being casually cruel without even recognizing it, I'll take that criticism with appropriate weight. Geiser walked toward the elevator. Goodbye, Constance. I genuinely hope you learn something from this experience. But whether you do or don't is no longer my concern. She left her former mother-in-law standing in the lobby, security already moving to escort her out. In the elevator rising to her penthouse, Geiser felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no emotional turmoil. She'd simply drawn a boundary and enforced it. Something she should have done years ago, instead of accepting mistreatment for the sake of keeping peace. At her computer, she reviewed reports from Latoya about the various Harrington holdings now being liquidated. Every transaction was legal, properly documented, following protocols established long before the collapse. If they chose to fight in court, they'd lose, and their lawyers had already advised them of that reality. The empire they thought they'd built was dissolving, assets distributed to creditors and investors. The Harrington name losing its power as people realized there was nothing substantial behind it. Her phone showed a text from Peter. Workshop is tomorrow. Still planning to come? No pressure if you need to cancel. She responded immediately. I'll be there. Looking forward to it? His reply was a simple smiley face, uncomplicated and genuine. She found herself smiling back at the screen, anticipating something positive in a period defined mostly by endings and dismantling. Peter represented possibility, not romantic necessarily, not yet, but human. The possibility of connection built on honesty rather than secrets, on mutual respect rather than convenient utility. Ben called, his number appearing despite being blocked. He must have borrowed someone else's phone. She answered out of curiosity more than obligation. My mother came to see you. His voice sounded hollow, defeated. She told me you refused to help. That's correct. Geiser, I know I hurt you. I know I failed you in every way that matters. But my family... Your family failed me too, Ben, repeatedly, deliberately, with your silent approval every single time. So you'll just watch us suffer. Watch my mother become homeless? Watch my nieces and nephews lose everything? I'll do exactly what your family did when they chose a Christmas party over my mother's funeral. I'll prioritize my own peace over their comfort. I'll focus on my own life, rather than sacrificing for people who never valued my sacrifices. Your family taught me that lesson very well. She ended the call, blocked the number he'd used, and returned to her laptop. There was work to do. Her own companies to manage, her own investments to monitor, her own empire to continue building now that she was no longer secretly supporting people who dismissed her. Tomorrow, she'd go to Peter's workshop, watch him teach teenagers about craftsmanship and integrity, and continue discovering what life looked like when she prioritized her own well-being over other people's expectations. The Harrington family would survive, or they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer her responsibility to prevent their natural consequences from catching up with them. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The community center smelled like sawdust and possibility. Guys watched Peter move between workstations, correcting a teenager's grip on a saw, praising another's careful measurements, explaining for the third time how to read a level without showing any frustration. His patience was remarkable, his genuine care for these kids visible in every interaction. They responded to him with respect that seemed earned rather than demanded, asking questions without fear of judgment. "You're good at this," she said during a break, handing him the water bottle he'd left on a table. "I love it. These kids remind me of myself at that age, hungry for skills, tired of being told they're not smart enough for college, so they might as well give up on ambition. Construction can be an art form if you approach it with respect and care. These kids deserve to know that working with your hands is just as valuable as working with your mind." One of the teenagers approached, a girl with wary eyes and defensive posture. "Mr. Noah, I finished the project. Want to check it before I mess it up somehow?" "You didn't mess anything up, Keisha. Let's look together." Peter walked with her back to her workstation, examining the small wooden box she'd constructed. "This is excellent work. The joints are clean, the finish is smooth. You should be proud. Really, it's not garbage. Really, you're a natural at this. Have you thought about apprenticeships? There are programs that pay you to learn while you work." The girl's face transformed, suspicion giving way to cautious hope. "People would actually pay me to learn this stuff." "Ah, absolutely. I can get you information if you're interested." Watching the interaction, Geyser felt something shift in her chest. This was what genuine kindness looked like, investing in people without expecting return, seeing potential in those others dismissed, using privilege to lift rather than exclude. The contrast with the Harrington family couldn't be more stark. Her phone buzzed insistently. She ignored it, focused on the workshop and the teenagers learning that their hands could create things of value and beauty. But the buzzing continued, persistent enough that Peter noticed. "You should probably check that. Might be important." She pulled out her phone reluctantly, seeing Ben's name lighting up the screen over and over. She declined the call, but he immediately called again. And again, something in the frantic repetition made her step outside to answer. "What? Where are you? I need to see you right now. It's urgent. I'm busy. Whatever it is can wait." "No, it can't. I'm outside your building. I know you're not home. Please, just tell me where you are. I'll come to you." "Absolutely not. Ben, we're getting divorced. You don't get to make demands on my time anymore. Please." His voice cracked. "I'm losing my mind here. I need to understand. I need to know if there's any way to fix this, any possibility of—" "There isn't. We're done. Sign the divorce papers and move on with your life." She ended the call, but unease prickled at her. Something in Ben's voice had been different, not manipulative or calculating, but genuinely destabilized. She thought about blocking his number entirely, but some instinct made her hesitate. When she returned to the workshop, Peter was wrapping up, helping students clean their workstations and store their projects safely. Keisha waved goodbye to Giza specifically, a small gesture that felt significant coming from someone so defended against the world. They walked to the parking lot together, Peter describing his plans to expand the program if he could secure additional funding. "I could help with that," Guys offered. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation in my mother's name, focused on providing opportunities for young people from difficult circumstances. This program seems exactly like something she'd want to support." Peter stopped walking, turning to face her. "That's incredibly generous, but I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated. I feel inspired. What you're doing here matters, and I want to be part of making it grow." He smiled, that genuine transformation of his entire face that she'd come to recognize and appreciate. "Then I'd be honored to work with you on that." They stood in the parking lot, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, something unspoken building between them. Peter opened his mouth to say something, and then his expression changed, looking past Guy's shoulder with sudden concern. "Is that guy coming toward us?" Gaze turned to see Ben approaching, his gait unsteady, his eyes wild, with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Her first thought was that he'd been drinking, but as he got closer, she recognized something more dangerous than intoxication, desperation that had crossed into instability. "Finally," Ben said, slightly out of breath from walking quickly. "I've been driving around looking for your car. We need to talk now." "Ben, how did you even find me here?" I tracked your phone. Had the app installed months ago, just in case. Didn't think I'd actually need to use it." He seemed proud of this invasion of privacy, not recognizing how concerning his words sounded. Peter stepped slightly in front of Guy's, his body language protective but not aggressive. "I think you should leave. She's made it clear she doesn't want to talk to you." "Who the hell are you?" Ben's attention snapped to Peter, rage igniting in his eyes. "Are you sleeping with my wife? Is that what this is? She destroys my entire life and then immediately moves on to some other guy. I'm not sleeping with anyone, Ben. Peter is my friend. Not that it's any of your business anymore, given that we're getting divorced." Geyser moved around Peter, refusing to hide behind him. "You need to leave. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Ben laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "I'm harassed? You destroyed my family. My mother's about to be evicted. My brother filed for bankruptcy. My sister's kids had to change schools because they can't afford the old one. And you're worried about harassment? I removed my support from people who never appreciated it. That's not destruction. That's natural consequences." "Natural consequences?" Ben's voice rose, attracting attention from people leaving the community center. "You deliberately engineered our collapse. You embedded clauses and conditions specifically designed to destroy us. That's not natural. That's calculated revenge. It's accountability. Something your family has avoided for generations by using people like me to prop up your lifestyle." Ben took a step toward her, and Peter immediately moved between them. "Back up now! Don't tell me what to do with my own wife." "She's not your wife anymore except on paper, and that's temporary." Peter's voice stayed calm but firm. "You need to leave before this situation escalates in ways you'll regret." Ben's face contorted with emotions. Giza had never seen from him before, rage and desperation and something that looked almost like genuine pain. 5 years. I gave you 5 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Don't I deserve a chance to fix this? You had 5 years to treat me with basic respect and decency. You failed repeatedly. There's nothing left to fix, Ben. We're done." "Because of him?" Ben pointed at Peter accusingly. "You're throwing away our marriage for some construction worker?" "I'm ending our marriage because you abandoned me at my mother's funeral to drink champagne with your family. Peter has nothing to do with that decision. He's just someone who showed me what actual kindness looks like." Ben's expression crumbled, and for a moment, Geyser saw past his anger to the scared man underneath. The one who'd cried in her apartment 5 years ago about failing his father's legacy. She felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but refused to let it override her clarity about what needed to happen. "I'm sorry I hurt you," she said quietly. "I genuinely am, but I'm not sorry for leaving. You and your family treated me terribly, and I'm done accepting that treatment. Sign the divorce papers. Move forward with your life. Let me move forward with mine. And if I refuse, if I fight this, then you'll lose, and you'll lose badly. My lawyers are better than yours, and more importantly, I can afford them indefinitely while you can barely afford rent. Please don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Ben looked between her and Peter, something dying in his eyes as he finally understood that this was truly over, that no amount of arguing or pleading or threats would restore what he'd lost. "Fine, I'll sign your papers. I'll give you your divorce. But I want you to know something, guys. Whatever you build with him or anyone else will always be tainted by how you destroyed me to get it. You'll always know you're capable of ruining people, and that knowledge will poison everything you touch. He walked away before she could respond, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Peter touched her arm gently. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay," and surprisingly she was. Ben's parting shot had been designed to wound, but it had missed its mark. She wasn't ashamed of drawing boundaries or enforcing consequences. She was proud of finally valuing herself enough to walk away from people who didn't value her. They stood together in the parking lot as the sun sank lower, and Guys realized something important. She was done with the Harrington chapter, done with revenge and confrontation and proving her worth to people who'd never learned to see it. She was ready to focus on building something new, something authentic, something that honored her mother's memory by refusing to settle for less than she deserved. Chapter 10. The Empire. She chose. 3 months later, the divorce papers arrived with Ben's signature, finalizing what Guys had known was inevitable since the day she stood alone in that empty church and understood that some betrayals were too profound to forgive. She signed her own name with steady hands, returned the documents to her lawyer, and felt nothing except profound relief that washed over her like clean water. The Harrington chapter was officially closed, sealed, finished. Whatever came next was entirely her choice to make without their influence or expectations weighing her down. She drove to the cemetery, bringing her mother fresh white roses and news about the life she was building from honest foundations. "The foundation is officially established, Mama, the Evelyn Green Foundation for Educational Opportunity. We're funding scholarships and apprenticeship programs and community workshops for young people who remind me of us, people who need opportunity more than charity, who need someone to believe in them the way you always believed in me, even when the world said we weren't good enough." The scholarship fund had already changed lives in tangible ways. Keisha from Peter's workshop was enrolled in a prestigious apprenticeship program, learning advanced carpentry while earning wages that let her help support her younger siblings. 3 other teenagers had received full scholarships to schools they couldn't have afforded otherwise, schools that would open doors their backgrounds might have kept closed. The foundation was small still, just beginning, but growing steadily, and it felt like the best possible use of wealth she'd once hidden in shadows, out of fear. Peter arrived with his own flowers, their cemetery meetings having become routine over the months, a ritual that honored grief while making space for healing. He'd met her here several times, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, just offering consistent presence and genuine care that asked for nothing in return. Today he sat beside her in the grass, close enough that their shoulders touched, sharing warmth and silence. "The Harrington collapse is complete," she told him, sharing news she'd received from LaToya that morning. "Ben's working for a mid-sized firm, doing work he used to consider beneath him, earning a fraction of what he thought he deserved. Trevor opened a small accounting practice, helping local businesses with their taxes. Joanna is managing a boutique for someone else, not owning it, but learning humility through honest work. Constance sold her jewelry collection and is living in a modest apartment, learning to live on a budget for the first time in her privileged life. How do you feel about that? Really feel? Honestly, nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no emotional investment whatsoever. They're surviving, learning to live within actual means, experiencing reality without artificial support. That's not tragedy or victory. That's just life for most people, the life millions live without complaint. You're not tempted to help them? Now that time has passed and emotions have cooled, now that you've had space to process everything. No, they had years to treat me decently and chose not to. They made their choices repeatedly, deliberately, with full awareness of what they were doing. I'm not responsible for fixing consequences they created themselves through their own actions and attitudes. She paused, considering her next words with the care they deserved. I'm done looking backward, Peter, done processing the past and analyzing what went wrong, and trying to understand people who'll never understand themselves. I'm ready to focus entirely on what's ahead, on what I can build, rather than what I had to burn down. He turned to look at her directly, understanding what she was really saying beneath the words. What does that look like for you? What do you want your future to be? It looks like building the foundation with people who share my values and actually appreciate collaboration. Working with teenagers who deserve chances they weren't born into. Spending time with someone who sees me for who I actually am, rather than what I can provide or how I can be useful. She met his eyes. If that someone is still interested in me after watching me systematically destroy my ex-husband's family. Peter's smile was slow and genuine and full of warmth that reached all the way to his eyes. That someone has been patiently waiting for you to be ready, waiting without pressure or expectations. And yes, he's very interested. More interested than he probably should admit. But honesty has been our foundation from the beginning. They sat together in the quiet cemetery, surrounded by memories of people they'd loved and lost, making deliberate space for something new to grow in soil enriched by grief and honesty. Not rushed, not desperate, not trying to fill voids or escape pain or replace what was lost. Just honest and present and willing to see where truth could lead when given room to develop naturally without force. Later, they had dinner at the small restaurant that had become their regular spot through repeated choice, talking about foundation plans and construction projects and favorite books they'd discovered. Nothing profound or earth-shaking, just the comfortable exchange of two people learning each other's patterns and preferences, building intimacy through accumulated small moments rather than grand gestures. When Peter walked her to her car, he kissed her, brief and sweet and full of possibility that neither of them tried to define or rush. "Is this okay?" he asked afterward, always checking, always making sure her comfort mattered more than his desire. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This is exactly what I need." The following weeks blurred together in the best possible way. Gaze continued managing her empire, but now she did it openly, no longer hiding behind shell companies or pretending to be less than she was to make others comfortable. She joined boards, gave interviews about women in technology and building wealth from nothing, used her visibility to advocate for opportunities she'd once needed desperately. And through it all, Peter remained exactly who he'd always been. Steady, kind, genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings, never intimidated by her success or resentful of her wealth. They attended foundation events together. Peter, comfortable in settings where wealth and power congregated, because he had no insecurity about his own worth or his place in any room. He introduced her to his friends, working-class people who judged character rather than bank accounts, who welcomed her warmly once they understood she didn't consider herself superior to anyone, regardless of what she'd built. She introduced him to LaToya, who approved immediately and enthusiastically, telling guys later that Peter looked at her the way every woman deserved to be seen, with respect and genuine affection and wonder at his good fortune. The Harrington family sent one final message through their lawyers, a settlement offer that would require guys to restore some portion of their former wealth in exchange for signing agreements never to speak about the collapse publicly or reveal what they considered family secrets. She declined without hesitation or second thoughts. Their story wasn't hers to protect or conceal, and she had no interest in funding their comfort at the cost of her peace or her principles. Ben married again within a year, choosing someone from his new social circle, someone who fit his reduced circumstances and modest lifestyle. Geese heard about it from mutual acquaintances and felt only mild curiosity, the kind you feel about strangers' lives glimpsed in passing. That chapter held no power over her anymore, no ability to hurt or anger or even interest her particularly. She'd learned what she needed to learn, mourned what deserved mourning, and moved forward into a life that honored her mother's memory by refusing to settle for less than authentic love and genuine respect. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Geza stood at the grave with Peter beside her, flowers in both their hands. their presence together feeling natural and right. I kept my promise, Mama. I remembered my worth when it would have been easier to forget. I walked away from people who couldn't see my value. And I found someone who sees me clearly and loves what he sees, who celebrates my strength instead of feeling threatened by it. Peter squeezed her hand gently, offering silent support without needing words to convey his understanding and care. They stood together as the sun set, two people who'd found each other in grief and built something beautiful from shared understanding and mutual respect. The empire guys had once hidden now served purposes that mattered beyond accumulating wealth. Education for those who needed it, opportunities for those who deserved them, support for those learning to build with their hands and their hearts and their determination. She'd been powerful before, but she'd been invisible, hiding her light to make others comfortable. Now she was powerful and present, using her resources to create change rather than to prop up people who didn't appreciate her sacrifices. The Harrington family had taught her valuable lessons about boundaries and self-worth that she'd needed to learn. Peter was teaching her equally valuable lessons about genuine partnership and uncomplicated affection that wasn't transactional or conditional. Walking away from the cemetery, Peter's arm around her shoulders in a gesture that felt protective without being possessive. Geisa felt her mother's presence like benediction, like approval, like love that transcended death. This was the life she'd been meant to build all along, authentic, purposeful, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was, rather than what she could provide. The empire she chose wasn't measured in dollars or power over others or the ability to destroy those who wronged her. It was measured in lives changed for the better, opportunities created where none existed, and the courage to demand the respect and love she deserved without apology. Some foundations are built to last forever, constructed with care and integrity and honest materials. Gaze had finally learned to build on solid ground, to value herself enough to walk away from unstable structures, to create something that would endure because it was built on truth rather than secrets, on mutual respect rather than hidden power, on love that was freely given rather than desperately earned.